paleontology A-term, we went on a dig, and the goal of this was to get some practical field work with paleontology. This is really important because there are things you can only learn when you're out there actually experiencing it. For example, we saw a bunch of pictures of bone when we were doing the prep work, but when we actually got out there, I looked at the ground and I couldn't see anything that looked worth picking up. And then Dr. Bacher, one of the experts that came with us, found and showed us a piece of neurological spine that he found on the ground, and suddenly it was like they were everywhere. So yeah, it's pretty impossible to do that anywhere except out in the field.
So the first 2 days before we went up to Seymour, we did a lot of prep work. So we did a tour around the Paleontology Hall, which took most of the first day, and we focused specifically on the Permian period because that's what we would be digging. Then later that afternoon, we watched matrix, which is the soil that you find around the main fossils. And so in that, you find a lot of small teeth, small bones, and all the things that were kind of living around there that you don't necessarily have a skeleton for. And so that gives you an idea of the ecosystem. So we washed that out to get some of the big chunks of mud out. And then we let that dry overnight. And the next day, we set up in front of the Paleontology Hall and went through the matrix once it's washed, which is called a soil sample. And we pulled out things like teeth and little pieces of bone.
So I can talk a little bit about each of our days, starting with the drive up. So the drive up to Seymour, Texas is about 8 hours. And so on the trip, some of our notable stops were, we stopped at the beef jerky capital of Texas, which is always interesting. And so, you know, the drive was nice. It was pretty long, but we finally arrived in Seymour, and our first stop would be just taking a self-guided tour around the Whiteside Museum, which is the local museum in Seymour. It's a very small museum, substantially smaller than the one in Houston. So the first section of the museum has kind of sculptures of different things that you would find if you were digging out in Seymour. So like Dimetrodon and Xenocamp, and then maybe some different things that children would be more interested in, like a giant T-Rex. So that's the first section of the museum. We walked through, read some of the plaques, got ourselves oriented with what we'd be digging for. And then we moved on to the next section of the museum, which is focused on different wildlife you find in the region. So it has some different replicas of different things that you find, and then they actually have some, you know, some small critters, I guess you could say, that you could look at, like lizards and Texas horned frog and snake and stuff like that. So it was really good first day. You know, a good thing to do after the long drive, kind of get your feet, stretch your feet or stretch your legs, and then kind of get out there and learn about what we'd be digging for. So Seymour, Texas is a very small town. It's about 2,000 people, and it had, I don't know if you would say they had a boom, but at one point they had 6,000 people in the town. And it's an agricultural town, so it's mostly ranchers, and they farm wheat, and they have cows and things like that, and a couple small restaurants, but it's very small. So this is a picture of the museum, the Whiteside Museum, which is really impressive, and this is in one of the restaurants that we went to. So very interesting, much different than Houston, and it was great being able to work out there.
So we went with kind of 3 experts in the field of paleontology. The first is Dr. Bob Bacher. He was consulted on the Jurassic Park films. He also kind of headed up the idea of dinosaurs having feathers and birds being descendants of dinosaurs. And he is the head curator of paleontology of the Houston Museum of Natural Science. But he lives in Colorado, so David Temple, who's the associate curator of paleontology at the Houston Museum of Natural Science on the right, is the guy who's kind of like our go-to guy who would be like, what is this? And he would tell us, and he was there, he stayed in the hotel with us, and we just all got to know each other very well. And then Chris Splits in the middle is heads up the Whiteside Museum in Seymour, and he went out there a few years ago from Houston and has started this whole museum there in this little town.
Okay, so Bill Whitley on the right owns the Craddock Ranch, which is the ranch that the Houston Museum digs on. He was really helpful to us and very friendly. He actually came out on a dig with us, and when we were going on a walk to the K2 site, he found some vertebrae and some new sites. And he also let us meet his tame longhorns. And the Georges own the ranch that the Whiteside Museum digs on and that Mary is located on. And they were also really helpful to us. And the ranchers, so the Coulthard brothers, Donald and Gary, lease the Craddock Ranch, and they use it as an operative cattle ranch. And Donald Coulthard has a pirate dog, Sissy, who's on his shoulder. And they were very friendly to us, and they've been really helpful to the Houston's field program. And Sissy came out and dug with us. So, kind of as an intro to some of the main animals that we would find when we go digging in Seymour, this is a Dimetrodon. This would have been your biggest predator and carnivore of the time. It's about tiger size. So they're actually, the interesting thing about Dimetrodons is they're actually related to modern mammals and humans, not modern reptiles. Because if you look here, you can see there's kind of a hole behind the eye socket. So that modern mammals have, but modern reptiles have two holes. They have that one there and then one a little bit higher up on the head, and that's where like the jaw muscles would have gone through the skull. So the Adaptosaur is the biggest herbivore of the time, and it's interesting because we've only found parts of one of these in the main quarry where we dig. So we found through this site and other sites that the Adaptosaurs and Dimetrodons really didn't interact very much, like people kind of assumed that they did in the past. We also have found that they like much faster moving water, whereas Dimetrodons would have like kind of slow moving or not moving really sedentary swamps where they would have been able to find some of the things that they ate. So the reason they like fast moving water is because of that really powerful swamp that they've got. Another guy that we find a lot is called Diplocalus, or boomerang head. Like they have boomerang heads. These guys are small amphibians, and we find them a lot in their burrows because they would have burrowed down, and then when the burrow collapsed, it basically collapsed on them and preserves the whole specimen. So also we find them with bite marks, the guy on the right. So that would have been when the Dimetrodon was digging down and trying to find these guys to eat. Sometimes he wouldn't be able to find all of them, so he would bite down on the snout and take a little piece off. They also have porous holes in their head, so that's how you know if you found amphibian skull. They're not the only amphibian skull. You don't only find amphibian skull from these guys, but it's a good way to kind of figure out if you found amphibian skull to start with.
This is Xenacanthus. It lived from 360 million years ago to the late Triassic, which was 202 million years ago. So that's actually a very long time, but today it's extinct. And Xenacanth shark lived in fresh water. It ate things such as like crustaceans and scaly fish, and it was usually over 3 feet long. Probably the most prominent feature of this shark is the barb that it has protruding out of its skull. And it is believed that the shark was venomous, so this barb would be much like a stingray stinger, actually. And the way we know it was venomous is because it has a little hole in the middle of the spine, and they believe that that's where the venom came through.
So as I talked about before, it was interesting that you found that the biggest carnivore and the biggest herbivore of the time, the Dimetrodon and the Adaptosaur, really didn't interact at all. So in the past, people had thought, well, you've got your biggest carnivore and your biggest herbivore, they're going to eat each other. It's just how the food chain is going to work. But we found that that's really not what happened. So there's a layer called Shark Zero in the main quarry where we dig, and it's basically all these little bits of shark that have been chewed up by Dimetrodons. So they figured out through them that these small ponds that they had actually had these sharks in them, and they would basically attack them in mass numbers and just slaughter them. And because they were cold-blooded, they didn't have to eat every day or every week like we do. They could go months without eating. So they could go from different ponds and find these sharks. And then when they couldn't find the sharks, they would go digging for the small amphibians like the Diplocalus, hence the bite mark. And so the way they ate the sharks is a lot like modern bears eat salmon when they go catch them. And it's also interesting because both those scenarios show carnivores eating carnivores, which is not what you typically see carnivores eating herbivores, but you don't have that in this situation.
So now that we're kind of oriented to the type of things that we were looking for, I can talk about some of our field days, which was the main part of our trip. So the first day we went out to the George Ranch, the site that's called Mary, and we went out there and got an orientation for Dr. Bacher, kind of talking about the sediment and different things that he wanted us to know before we started digging. Gave us maybe some tips on how to dig and how to be very careful but still move substantial amount of sediment so that you can make some progress. And so we dug there for the morning and the afternoon, and This was probably our least successful day, which was a little bit discouraging at first, but we ended up finding lots of stuff. But this was this quarry that we worked on was actually the Whiteside Museum's quarry, whereas the quarry we would work on for the rest of the week was the Houston Science Museum's quarry.
That afternoon, instead of going back to dig there, Alex and I actually went back to the Mary site and we worked on jacketing. So when you find bone in the ground, it's usually in a bunch of pieces, and it's really important to know how those pieces go together and where you found them, because if you just pop them out, you'd have to reassemble them and their context in the lab, and that's really difficult. So paleontologists use a method called jacketing to keep the bones together and in context. So to jacket a bone, you first dig a trench around the bone. This is called pedestaling, and you have to be really careful when you're doing it because a lot of the time you can find bone around there. This is the only time in paleontology when they're actually hoping not to hit bone because it makes jacketing really hard. And if you don't hit bone, then you cover the exposed bone tightly with tin foil, and then you mix plaster and you soak burlap strips in the plaster, and then you cover the pedestal with plaster, and you let that harden. And then when that's completely hard, you flip it and put plaster on the other side, and then it's ready to be transported to the lab.
So for our second field day, we got to do something really interesting and kind of get our spirits up, and that was looking through a spoil pile. So there are kind of two different types of spoil piles that we would encounter over the course of the trip, and one was actually from the early 1900s when they actually used TNT to kind of just blow up a site, and that's how they would kind of excavate and look for different bones, which obviously isn't a very good method as we know now, but it's good for us because we have these giant piles of different bone fragments that we could look through, and there was lots of them. So this was really good because we got to search on the ground for bones, find them, and then talk to the experts and ask, hey, what is this? What is this? And then it would be really good for being able to identify those when you're digging really carefully. So that was a really helpful experience, and we got lots of bags full of bones, which was really cool that we got to take back. I think we took them back to Houston, and so it was a really good start to our digging. And then in the afternoon, we went to the Craddock Ranch, and then we went to the main quarry there, and we each kind of worked on one section of the quarry and started our digging. So John and I worked in the Shark Zero layer, and we didn't find anything substantial in the morning, but from where we were digging the next day, we would end up finding lots of things. So it was a good field day. 2 was really good. Oh yeah, so one of the owners of I think it was the Craddock or the George Ranch, invited us out for dinner, which was great, a good break from eating out, and they cooked hamburgers, and we had a good time talking to them and talking about everything that they do and watching basketball. So that was a really it was really nice of them to let us come out and do that. So field day 3, we started off in the morning for a couple hours, and Emily got to feed some longhorns, and we got to take pictures with them, which was really fun. But we were all really eager to get back out to the site. So we went back out to the Craddock, and we did some more digging, and this would be the day, as John's about to talk about, where we would find a xenocant spine, which was very cool, and it was still in the sediment. So and then Dr. Ott would find a vertebrae, so that was really cool. And so we would spend the remainder of our morning and the afternoon digging.
Yep, so Shark Zero, as Rains was mentioning, it's a layer of sediment in the Craddock Quarry where we were digging, and it's called Shark Zero because there's just a ton of shark remains in it. So dozens of the xenocant spines and cartilage especially, because those are usually the only things that become preserved because the rest is usually eaten or crushed. And before we arrived in Seymour, only a small part or a bit of the Shark Zero layer has been discovered, and Rains and I helped uncover more of it. So
field day 4 would actually it would actually be a half day because we were all very tired from the last 3 days being out in the sun. So, but we still wanted to really work on some of the things we were making progress on. So we went out for a half day. It was very productive. And this was the day where in the Shark Zero layer we found what we think is a baby xenocamp, and we also found 2 parts of an uncrushed skull, which is pretty rare. So it was a good day. We kind of actually wish we would have been able to stay for the afternoon, but we were very tired. So, and everybody was making a lot of progress, and Emily and Ari actually went up above the quarry and worked on, uncovering another kind of set of bones and doing something a little different. And then everybody else kind of stayed where they had been working because we were all finding so much stuff. Oh, well, I will mention this. I wasn't sure if I should mention it. This was the day where Alex did break his leg, but he is doing much better now. So, yeah. So field day 5 was our last day, unfortunately. We were all feeling like we were just starting to find a bunch of stuff and we had to leave. So we did a lot this day. We went early in the morning and stayed till late in the afternoon. And so for John and I, we were working on the spine that we had found, and we were working on, as already talked about earlier, jacketing it, which was making the plaster and then putting it over. And then the last hour, the plaster finally hardened, but Dr. Bacher right here would end up removing it in the morning, and all went well. So field day 5 was kind of a wrap-up day. We got all our fossils we had found, loaded them up, finished up any work that we had done, and got ready to leave for the next day. And so the drive back was pretty much giving Alex a teddy bear, John and I sleeping, Ari sleeping, and we did stop back at the beef jerky capital of Texas again for that overpriced jerky, so it was good. Sure, and we also have a short movie because we have hundreds of pictures. Hello, Dr. Ott.
Hi.
What did you do today?
Let's see, I took out there was a vertebrae that I found yesterday, and we had taken the top half had flipped off and the bottom half was still in, and so we took the elevation and we got the bottom half out. And then I was digging back behind that to see if there were any other bones in that area, but there were not. So it was an isolated bone.
So how do you take the elevation? What do you mean by that?
So we use this piece of equipment here, and they hold up. It's not available at the moment but they hold up a very long yardstick, and it's in centimeters, of course. And they take a back shot, and then they take a foreshot at the exact spot that your piece is, and they figure out the elevation. And they've taken an original elevation so they know where everything is.
Why is this important?
So that they know exactly where in this area it was, because this is called the main quarry right now, and each little section is named for either the thing that's in it or for somebody that you want to name it.
Did you enjoy your day?
I did until I got really hot and I got a headache from the heat.
All right.
Sun. Yeah.
Emily?
Hey.
So what have you been doing today?
Digging through a spoil pile, which is basically what came out of the hills when they dynamited it early in the 1900s.
So what kind of stuff have you been finding?
Dimetrodon teeth, vertebra, lots of neural spine. Let's see what else. Some possible toe bones.
How much have you found? Like a lot or?
A lot.
A lot?
Yeah.
Have you enjoyed it?
A lot.
So what have you been doing today, John?
So we've been going through all of this spoil site here, looking for some bone fragments and fossils. So far it's been pretty good. Found a few Dimetrodon teeth And yeah.
Well, show me your bags. What all did you find?
So these are just mostly small bone fragments.
Like what type of bone?
I think most of it's going to be small reptiles. We actually found what we believe is a snake or a saltwater shark too. That was kind of unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And then in this bag we have some larger bone fragments from, I don't know, miscellaneous things. They're hard to identify. So it's been a good day so far. Looking forward to more.
What is your favorite food that you've had in Seymour?
Probably when I got to barbecue those vegetables, honestly, when we went to the George's Ranch.
Did you eat them?
Yes,
Were they good?
they were delicious.
What's your favorite thing that you've done here in Seymour?
Favorite thing that I've done? Probably looking at the spoil pile, because it's easy and really immediately satisfying.
All right, what's the most interesting thing that you've learned on this trip?
I mean, this is really vague, but probably just how messy science is. Like, I find that really fascinating. I think it's really cool.